What's going on, horror fanatics? So last week I went and seen I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I was disappointed. And I'm not sure how I could be so disappointed because my expectations were really low. And I didn't watch any trailers or any teasers leading up to this movie because I wanted everything to be fresh. And in a way, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't want Sony to touch this franchise again because, unlike most people, I actually love the 1997 I Know What You Did Last Summer. And it's in my top 10 horror movies of all time because, I'm a 90s kid and I grew up on the 90s horror. So I always try to defend the 90s horror movies like Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, The Blair Witch Project, and so on. So, I always try to defend myself against other people when people say, oh, the 90s, that's when horror began to get, kind of bad or whatever. But, that's neither here or there. That's another video. But like I said, the original is in my top 10 horror movies of all time. And I also like the sequel. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. I like that sequel. And, I know this movie gets a lot of flack and people call this, the worst in the franchise. I Will Always Know What You Did Last Summer. Now, me, I think it's pretty good. And the production, they didn't have a real big budget. Of course, it went to DVD, but I feel like if that movie had a blockbuster film budget, I felt like it would have did great in the theaters because it had a great plot to it. And I also want to mention that the Amazon Prime series, it was solid too, and I got to go back and rewatch that because it's kind of foggy. I remember certain things and some things I don't. But yeah, from what I remember, it was solid. But anyway, the 2025 remake was horrible in so many ways. The acting was horrible, the dialogue was cringe, and the motive was garbage. It just felt like the entire movie was rushed, and it was like Sony said, hey, we have to meet our quota, so let's hurry up and make a movie. Now, one of the things that is the heartbeat of this franchise is the accidental deaths. Now, in the original, everyone knows that Ray was driving and he hit the guy, and then everyone collectively agreed to dump the body. And the dude was still alive, but, they dumped the body anyway. And they, made a pact to keep it a secret. Now, that will run anyone crazy, especially being 18 or 19 years old. And so, for that group of teens right there, that was a good reason to be scared and paranoid because they dumped the body into the lake. And the dude was still alive, so, basically they did kill someone. Now, in this new 2025 movie, this new group of friends, they ride up around these dangerous curves and they actually park on a curb. Now, anyone who drives knows don't do that. But anyway, they have one friend acting drunk. He's jumping in front of cars or whatever, having to be saved. And then on this last time, he's walking out in front and this truck comes and he's trying to swerve and avoid him. But he ends up almost going off the cliff. Now, the truck is teetering back and forth on the cliff, and the truck eventually falls down to the ground and into the water. And even though these group of friends were acting stupid, it was an honest mistake at that point. And they even tried to make a heroic effort to save this individual from falling off the cliff, but of course they couldn't help him at that point. And they left the scene, but they called for help. And 1 year later, it seems like their lives are spiraling out of control because of this accident. And I just feel like watching this, I'm like, I don't believe it. Like, I felt no sympathy for the person who actually died and fell off the cliff, and I felt no sympathy for the friends. But now I want to go ahead and talk about some things in this movie that I really didn't like. And one of those things were the sound effects. The fisherman had on rubber boots throughout this whole entire movie. And if anyone went to see this movie, it sounded like steel toe boots, walking real hard, and the sound was just amplified. And I'm like, we can see these rubber boots on the screen, right? And, those boots don't make those kind of sounds. And another thing I dislike, and some people might not see this as a big issue, but for me it was, the opening credits music, it did not set the tone. It actually, pulled me away from the movie. Like, am I watching a horror movie? I don't know. It just took me back for a second. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of the original movie. And the original I Know What You Did Last Summer, the opening credit music gave off this cool but creepy vibe. And it matched the tone for what was in store, for this movie later on. And I can't say the same with this reboot. And Jennifer Love Hewitt. Jennifer Love Hewitt in this movie was useless. Freddie Prinze Jr. was the only one who really kept things interesting, and he barely did that. And Sarah Michelle Gellar. Don't get me started on that. I got a rant video and a deep dive on why the writer went with Ray being one of the killers and Sarah Michelle Gellar being wrote into the script. And I can't even believe no one has mentioned this yet. But I'm definitely going to make a rant video about it, and I probably will upload it tomorrow, so definitely be on the lookout for that. So you're probably wondering if I have any positive things to say about I Know What You Did Last Summer 2025. Well, I like how they incorporated Southport into a more important piece into the story. And Southport now, with another movie under his belt, and it's only 2 movies, but, I feel like, it got that sense of Haddonfield, Woodsboro, and I feel like they did a great job with that. So that's a positive thing. And if I guess I had to pull another positive out, it would be the small Easter eggs throughout this movie. Like, one of the ones I actually kind of popped for was the float that was in the parade in the original movie. I thought that was a nice surprise. And it wasn't too much, but, I'm not sure if a lot of people caught on to that. But this movie was very, very awful. And I think the producers and the writers know they had to go in this direction for reasons I will share in my follow-up video. But setting up a sequel is what they had to do to make this a better story in the future. That's how I feel. And like I said, I'm going to do a little deeper dive into why they went this direction in the next video. But anyway, how do you all feel about this movie? So the killers, spoiler alert. So we had Ray and this other girl. And I just felt like they didn't need a woman to be a killer because it was too many parallels to Scream. And Scream already did that a couple of times. And it just, I don't know, it wasn't that big of a deal or a surprising element to this I Know What You Did Last Summer sequel. So, I don't know, I feel like they dropped the ball with that. But, yeah. Y'all let me know down in the comment section below. What do you all feel about this new reboot of I Know What You Did Last Summer? And if you love any and everything horror movie related, anything paranormal, make sure you check out my channel. If you like my videos, then make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can see every time I upload. As always, be safe, peace.